In the last two videos, I focused on the You Netflix series. I talk about my experience with it, my impressions, and also go a bit into the psychology of it as to why people might be vibing to the soundtrack of it and why people actually like Joe, tend to like Joe Goldberg. And I look at this through the IFS lens. And in the second one, I do a deep dive into the how protective parts form, including the killer part with Joe and all these dynamics around them. In this one, I talk about some of the most extreme parts that come up, as well as whether there is any hope for Joe Goldberg at all. So what becomes clear later in the fourth season of the You series is that Joe experiences a so-called personality split, also known as DID or dissociative identity disorder. Richard Schwartz touches on it in the context of IFS, arguing that DID often happens as a result of deep trauma with certain individuals, and it's just that in DID the parts are blown much farther apart, so one experiences this phenomena when a part does not know about the existence or actions of another. In IFS, it's often common that parts don't know your age or your current circumstances. For example, an inner critic who might berate you. When asked, they might tell you they think you are 5 or 8 or 12 and that they need to keep an eye on you so you don't get in trouble or fail and get ridiculed and so on. And often the critic itself is very young. So Joe carries on with his life, a fresh start in yet another new city, while his murderer part also carries on with its life, except Joe is not aware of it now. Yet people are found dead here and there, and now Joe is trying to solve the puzzle of who is committing all these murders. He also seems to have acquired a new friend, Reese, a rather mysterious individual who, unlike many in his new circle of friends, seem to share a similar cynical view on many issues. At some point, Joe starts to be blackmailed by this new friend who he has identified to be the killer. The story is quite convoluted here, with many details that are not worth spoiling, nor can I afford the space. But the important piece is that this new friend turns out to be Joe's split away killer part in the form of a hallucination who's trying to convince him that they are alike and coerce him into killing his political opponent. To explain, this imaginary Reese has a real person counterpart who runs for mayor in reality. And this sounds weird, and why would that split part push Joe to kill? Well, remember, parts don't like to be locked away or exiled. Besides, the killer side of Joe is a firefighter. Firefighters often get a kick from their behavior. They like the adrenaline rush because that makes them strong, invincible, and brings justice to whatever cause. So the part believes it plays an important role for Joe, and so it will push Joe to accept it, look at it, by letting itself be known and by encouraging him to act, to surrender to its strategy of killing. Forced by some external circumstances, Joe goes ahead and kills the actual real Reese, who in reality never met Joe, nor did he know anything about what Joe was accusing him of. When Joe realizes what he did, he is shocked, yet his split part is simply thrilled. See, we are the same, it says. And finally brings Joe into the realization that the Reese he's been seeing and who's been pushing him to kill was a hallucination, and that the person who's been committing the murders all this time and the killer he's been trying to find has been himself, Joe. Or more accurately would be to say his manager's parts find that out. The fresh start restorative ones. Imagine what that does to all those hard-working, rigorous managers who have been trying to run his life drama-free, decently, clean, with this new start in a new city. Joe is devastated. The parts longing for love and belonging, those haunted by loneliness, rejection, and abandonment, all betrayed. The tireless attempts to do things differently, The constant failure, the guilt, the powerlessness, the shame, and the worthlessness, it all comes flooding. Joe hits bottom. One can only imagine the shock. But of course, not all is lost. There is yet another protector, one that sits at the top of the pyramid as the last resort, the one that can put an end to it all, the suicide part. It's always been on standby. I find that scene on the bridge heartbreaking because it shows the fight between these extreme parts, both in an excruciating attempt to help Joe. The killer part clashes with the suicide part. The killer part is still a hallucination in the image of Reese, and the suicide part is embodied and fully blended with Joe. They are literally fighting for him, and in our inner world, what we often experience as inner conflicts is nothing else but parts with different strategies of protection or views fighting to help other vulnerable parts. In Joe's case, we now know the split killer part was protecting Joe's powerlessness and the pain of being abandoned and deprived of love through a schema that would remove anyone hindering his source of love and restraining her from ever escaping, a rather worked backfiring strategy. This part now is trying hard to convince him not to end his life, that together they can still make it work. The suicide part, though, sees the managers defeated, the inner critic's voice has prevailed or does not matter anymore, because this part now can at last put an end to all his pain for good, to this whole cycle of failure and loss. What we see next is Joe embracing this split part, then the suicide part takes over. A word on suicide through IFS lens. Suicidal parts often come to life in people when all the other hard-working parts run out of options. And a person often might come to the conclusion that indeed there is no way out. However, through the internal family systems approach, we become aware that it's only a part of that person that came to that conclusion, or a number of parts that maybe feel defeated, desperate, and lose hope, or parts that feel terrified of some potential outcome or carry shame, because the true self is always creative, accepting, and open to reach out, and it wants you to thrive. So negotiating some time with this part and the parts that feel scared or defeated and reaching out for some help is a better way. Remember, there is always another way out as long as you are alive. That is so true. If working with an IFS therapist, they can help you get to know that suicide part with curiosity and compassion, often understanding what a part is trying to do for you, and even extending it some appreciation for its intent will help the part soften back and give you some space where you can get to know and help the other parts involved. Ultimately, healing the exiled parts, those that carry the deepest painful feelings, that is what will help it change its role in your system. The last episode shows a new spin on things. Joe survives and has now allowed this split killer part to be somewhat integrated back into his consciousness, and it seems like he's got more choice over how to respond to situations other than just killing. But he's also empowered by money now, so we don't know what direction this might go in if there is another season. Is there hope for Joe? If Joe would go to do some therapy, it might be a long journey, and in some episodes he has some moments of clarity and breakthrough of some of that exiled fear and pain. IFS therapy would work with these extreme parts to help them meet the self of Joe, that aspect of him that it's pure love and joy, to understand how they came to take upon these roles and what they are afraid would happen if they didn't kill, stalk, or forcefully hold. Remember, Joe is not in control of them or fully conscious of them. The self would be able to hold them with compassion and understanding, grieving the loss on all sides. Once we find out what they are protecting, we would ask permission to help those hurting parts so they are not so scared, so their experiences would be healed and integrated. These parts would also meet Joe's self, the mature, loving, caring aspect of him. Through this work of repairing and integration, a person's inner world transforms, becoming more secure with access to love in the form of self-love first and foremost, and then other sources. The urge to pursue or hold onto someone at all costs will be gone, because splitting up with someone is not so life-threatening anymore for Joe. It doesn't mean there wouldn't be any feelings, but rage and a sense of abandonment that feels like dying will be replaced with less intense feelings like disappointment, maybe sadness, frustration, and eventually even these will subside. But if we look at the start of it all, it becomes obvious once more the importance of a coherent, loving family in the life of a child, the presence of a caring father, and the constancy of a mother's love for a boy or a girl. So this is my outlook on you. It's been a great experience, both the series and this deconstruction. And what are your thoughts on it? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and take good care of yourself.